Hey guys, if you're an Apple user, you might be aware that Apple are now rolling out the 22 version of their MacBook Air that has the brand new M2 chip. And they've also released a 13-inch version of their MacBook Pro that also has that M2 chip. But what I'd like to do in this video is talk about my experience of using a MacBook Air every single day for 5 months. Now, I have used Apple computers in the past. I had an iMac for 6 or 7 years in the late 2000s to kind of mid 2010s. I loved it. I used it every single day. But for the last 20 years or so, all of the laptops that I've owned have been Windows laptops. So this is my second Apple device, but it's my first ever Apple laptop. And what I've got here is the 2020 version of the MacBook Air that has the M1 chip, the first of this new Apple silicon. Now, I predominantly want to talk about hardware in this video, my positive experience with the hardware, but it is worth noting the software. Now, I picked up this laptop because 5 months ago, I started a 16-week programming course, software development course, and the requirement to do that course was that I had to have an Apple MacBook because the apps, the courses, everything was set up to use an Apple Mac. So I rushed out and I bought this. Now, one of the things that I did learn from my classmates is that there's a lot of people that exclusively use Apple MacBooks and Apple computers, and they hate Windows and they hate using other types of operating systems and platforms. I am not one of those people. I can easily switch from macOS to Windows. I can switch to Linux as well. And I think there's an argument, and I can see why some people don't like using Linux because there's not good app support. You need to be a little bit more hands-on. But yes, there are subtle differences between Windows and macOS, but for me, I don't think there's a major difference between macOS and Windows. There's subtle differences, the way you close Windows, the way you launch apps and close things and different things. But these are subtle things, and once you understand that and you realize that you use command instead of control, to me, it's not a big problem, especially because 99% of applications out there are available for Windows and for macOS. So what I'll say from a software side is that I don't really have a preference between using Windows and macOS. I'm very flexible. I can use both. And I don't think there's a major difference because the applications that you use are available on both operating systems. So, hardware. So, hardware is something that I feel Apple get right in a lot of places. I will say my negative thoughts on it, the thing that I hate about Apple MacBooks and just Apple computers in general. I'll get the negative thing out of the way. The thing that I hate about Apple computers, and it's the same criticism that I levy to Microsoft Surface Pros and Microsoft laptops, is that you can't change the memory, you can't change the storage. I think that's kind of changing now with some of the Microsoft laptops, but with Apple computers, you can't change the memory yourself. You can put in your own SSD, which wouldn't be as big of a problem if they didn't charge so much of a premium for upgrading. And it's something that I hate about Apple and their business model. If you go from 8 gigabytes to 16 gigabytes of memory, it's £200. You go up to 24, it's another £200. You go up to 32, it's another £200. And it's the same with the solid state drives, which I don't like. I like to be able to upgrade things myself. I like to be able to change things, especially if something breaks. And that's something I've always hated. The fact you can't change things, and the fact when you do upgrade, they charge so much money for doing so, which makes the entry-level models of MacBooks very attractive. But for me, it does get quite difficult to justify getting larger hard drives and getting more memory in the devices at the higher end of the market. So that's something that is frustrating, but it is something that, I know that Microsoft, etc. do as well. But let's talk about hardware. And I'll jump over to my overhead camera for this. So this is a MacBook Air, and my webcam's kind of spun around there. So this is a MacBook Air, and as someone who's been using a Dell XPS 13 most days for the last few years, there's not a massive difference here. They're really, from a build point of view, from a chassis point of view, these are very similar. We've got an aluminium shell. They're built to last. I mean, I do think this material, it does scratch quite easily, and I've found that myself, and it is quite slippy sometimes depending on the way you set it down. But absolutely no complaints. These things are built like tanks, and I don't really care too much about the scratches. I mean, I'm not looking to scratch the device, but I like the fact that this gives really good protection to the display. And because of that, you can open this with one finger and there's no flex really on the panel. So that's really good. And speaking about the panel, this isn't great for gaming. It doesn't have a good response time. It doesn't have a fast, like a high refresh rate, but the display is amazing. Fantastic for colors. It's got a decent resolution and, it's quite bright as well. The nits are quite high. So from a display point of view, from a chassis point of view, yeah, absolutely no complaints. And this is really where Apple get everything right with their MacBooks. The keyboard is amazing here, but that's something I'd say for Dell, generally speaking, as well, and a few other brands as well. Now, one thing I will say, I've got the trackpad here. Now, you guys have asked me a lot of times in the past, over the years, when I've spoke about laptops, is what's the trackpad like? And it's not something I've really been able to give a good answer to, because generally speaking, I always use a mouse with my laptop, and that remains the case. But during the course, there was lots of times where I'm just carrying the MacBook around, I didn't have my mouse and I had to use the trackpad. And I did get used to using the trackpad more. Now, I didn't feel that it was anything special. I really didn't think this trackpad lived up to these crazy expectations. Everyone talks about this trackpad being amazing. But I did then go back to the Dell XPS 13 and I used the trackpad there. And all of a sudden, I realized how bad the trackpad was in the Dell XPS 13 in comparison to the MacBook. So I have had more experience with using the trackpad rather than relying on my mouse all the time. And it is quality. It's significantly better than what I've got in other laptops. And it is something I am starting to notice now. But the keyboard is great, but that's something that I've had with other laptops as well. But yeah, from a hardware point of view, the keyboard, the trackpad, the chassis is really good. From a performance point of view, a lot of people had concerns about using Apple Silicon. I think that's less of an issue now because all the apps have been optimized for the M1 and the new M2 chip. What I'd say from a performance point of view is the model that I've got here has got 256 gigabytes of storage, which was never an issue for me. But the one thing that did become an issue was that I had the base model that had 8 gigabytes of RAM. So I had 8 gigabytes of memory to use, which for 2/3 of the course wasn't an issue, but there was some applications we used at the end, such as IntelliJ and different things, which did use a lot of memory, like 3-4 gigabytes when I was using Android Studio and different apps. And that became a concern. And that's where I wish that I'd paid a little bit more to get 16 gigabytes of memory. So from a performance point of view, it's been excellent. No issues with having a smaller hard drive. Not generally an issue having less memory on, just from browsing and doing basic things. But whenever I wanted to do multiple things at a time and, have video open and also have, my apps open for doing programming, the bottleneck was memory. And it did become an issue. So in the future, I don't think I'd ever buy a MacBook Air myself that only had 8 gigabytes. For me, 16 gigabytes is the minimum. It's done a great job though. I still use it all the time. Performance is amazing. It's just memory is the bottleneck and it's something I can't upgrade, which is a little bit frustrating. So I'm going to have to trade this in at one point to get more memory. But from a performance point of view, it's excellent. So what I'd like to do though is talk about other hardware that I think sometimes people do forget. Now, over the last year or so, I've looked at a lot of gaming laptops, and these laptops are impressive. They're noisy, and that's something that the Apple MacBook isn't. There's no fans in this device, which to me it doesn't seem to be an issue from a performance point of view, but it's been amazing that this doesn't have fans and it's just silent all the time. But the one thing I did notice, with all these expensive gaming laptops in the Windows world that are like, $2,000, $3,000, those gaming laptops are amazing performance-wise. They can play games, but they have the worst, best way to put it, the worst hardware that complements that. And by that, I mean that they have terrible webcams. Sometimes they have terrible speakers. Sometimes they have terrible microphones. And you might get the odd gaming laptop or the odd Windows laptop that does have a decent webcam or does have a decent microphone. But apart from, the kind of Microsoft range of laptops, in the Windows world, you're nearly always going to get an average or terrible webcam. You're always going to get an average microphone. With the Microsoft range of devices, you've got a good webcam, you get a good microphone, you get good speakers. And that's something that you see in the MacBook as well. So as a package, it's amazing. And you do pay a premium for that, you know, and there's a lot of Windows laptops, which for me, and from a performance point of view, perform very similar to this at almost half the cost. But what you get here is everything is just a little bit higher. You've got an amazing display, you've got an amazing webcam, you've got an amazing microphone, which for video calls, you know, if you're using video calls a lot like I am, I'm using Zoom and Microsoft Teams, etc. That is amazing. And that's really why I've had such a positive experience with this over the last 5 months. Yes, it performs well. Yes, the battery life is absolutely amazing, which, again, I never thought it was an issue with the Dell. I always liked the battery life here, but this is like almost double. And, you know, the standby time is amazing. And Apple just seemed to get all of that right. There's nothing here that's terrible. You know what I mean? It's, yes, the memory in this particular model is a little bit of a bottleneck, but the display is fantastic, the keyboard's fantastic, the trackpad's fantastic. Yes, the MacBook Air, you are sacrificing like an SD card slot, an HDMI port. You have to go up to the MacBook Pro for that, but they get all the things that you don't get in Windows. They get it right. You know, there's so many Windows laptops, and this is something that does frustrate me. And I am someone that loves Windows laptops. It frustrates me that there's so many Windows laptops out there that are like $1,500, $2,000, $3,000, and they stick on a 720p webcam that's terrible, or they put on dual speakers that are, you know, underneath the laptop and they sound horrific, or there's some gaming laptops out there that don't even have a webcam, or they don't have a microphone because they expect you to plug in an accessory. And that's why I think the Apple MacBook has been so good for me this year. It's just a fantastic all-round package. And there's nothing here that I think is subpar, apart from the price. And the entry-level models actually are quite reasonable for Apple MacBooks, I think. I think the entry-level prices, you know, like $1,000 or so for an Apple MacBook Air, I think they're quite reasonable. But if you can, it's worth bumping up. So, like I said, I'm not a big fan of the whole Apple's the best, Windows are the best, Dell's whatever. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm someone who can switch between different operating systems quite easily. I'm happy to do so. I enjoy doing so. The only thing for me is that I wish this could do games better. But yeah, overall, everything about this MacBook has been fantastic. And it's been an amazing little laptop. And I can see why people buy MacBooks now. I really can. I can see why people pay a premium because, you know, everything is just a little bit better. The webcam's better, the keyboard's better, everything's better. So overall, it's been fantastic using this. I don't think I'm exclusively going to go with MacBooks in the future. Ideally, I'm going to have a Windows laptop for gaming. I'm going to have an Apple MacBook for video editing and different things, but it's been great using this laptop. So thanks for watching, guys. I will do more videos about, you know, the Apple MacBook in the future because I suspect I'm going to upgrade this at one point and get a MacBook Pro or something. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you're all doing very well, and I'll speak to you all in the next one. Take care.